So a small update on our road rage guy from last week. So last week it was an altercation of some sort. A woman stood in front of a car and the guy's like, no, I'm going to drive away. And she, according to the reports, climbed on top of the car. And then he drove for nearly a kilometer trying to shake her off the car. So doing hard stops and swerving the car. Very much like an action movie. Turns out he was arrested. He's being arrested for attempted murder. The interesting point, and the only reason to update this, is it turns out he's a Buddhist priest. And I have a couple of weird questions about, I guess, Buddhist priests. For the number of Buddhist priests per capita in Japan, there actually seem to be an inordinate amount of stories about Buddhist priests committing crimes or getting in trouble like this. My image of Buddhist priests isn't that they would drive away and try to shake you off their car. They might talk to you first or try to impart some peace. Let's just say Buddhism and road rage don't match in my head. But I'm not a Buddhist. I don't have any sort of deep knowledge. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Buddha is very pro road rage. Maybe Buddha says if someone's on top of your car, try to shake them off and kill them. It seems like there's a lot of Buddhist priests getting in a lot of trouble. And that just seems weird. It's just, I don't have any sort of deep comment to make on it. It seems weird to me how many Buddhist priests get in trouble and then end up in the news. Or maybe it just stands out. Maybe that's it. Because it's a Buddhist priest and that doesn't mesh with my image of the Buddhist priest, it stands out in the news story. It's sort of like confirmation bias. But be wary of Buddhist priests, I guess, is the short version of this story, because I wasn't ready for that. A secondary update, and this is, for me, a much more relevant one. Last week, it was all basically just general news and stuff. That was great, and not so much crime. This week is almost exclusively crime and not so much general news. So I don't know if I did that on purpose, like subconsciously. I guess subconsciously means I didn't do it on purpose. I don't know if I did that subconsciously or not. All the news stories I pulled out this week are all basically crime stories. This one is not. This is an update on the health ministry party. So the health ministry, the people telling us that we can't go out, we have to stay home, we have to wear masks, we have to do everything right so we don't get coronavirus, they decided to have a goodbye party and they broke pretty much every rule they've laid out for everybody else. I suppose, ironically, I don't know. 3 of the 23 people who went to that party ended up testing positive for coronavirus. Now, there is, I guess, some solace for the people trying to justify the party, that 3 people in the health ministry who did not attend the party also have coronavirus. I mean, it's not great that 6 people have coronavirus, but it is illustrating that the virus wasn't spread around at the party. Like, they didn't get it at the party. They probably got it back at their office. But is that better? But the actual concern is the 3 people who had the coronavirus who went to the party because they were having a party and, breaking all the rules means not wearing a mask and not social distancing and stuff. They were potentially, if not almost guaranteed, to be spreading it to the other people at the party. So 2 weeks from now, because viruses tend to take a week or 2 to sort of settle in and get their stuff started, I would expect to hear that number of party attendees, the number of people who caught coronavirus, I would expect that to go up. I don't want it to, but the hypocrisy they're demonstrating by having this party, you'd almost say it's justified, like just desserts, but it's not really. I mean, we don't want people to get sick. I would like them to get humiliated maybe, but I don't want anyone to get sick. But if anyone was going to get sick, people telling other people to do stuff and then getting sick because they did the thing they told other people not to do, I'm more okay with that. I don't ever want to say I'm actually okay with it, but I'm way more okay with that than anything else. So this is not an update. This is a continuation. So there was a guy who refused to wear a mask on a Peach flight. And because he refused to wear a mask, they had to actually stop and land the plane. And he got in trouble. And then there was a second incident where he went into a hotel restaurant and refused to wear a mask, and they wanted to boot him out. And then he did it like 2 days in a row, and they called the cops. And he was arrested. He's been arrested for not wearing a mask. And now he's had his second arrest. This is his third time in the news, but his second actual arrest. Clearly, he hasn't learned his lesson as far as how far you can go by refusing to wear a mask. So you can refuse to wear a mask, but it gets to a point where when you are facing the authorities, in this case the police, there's only so much you can do and not get arrested. Like, you probably get arrested, but then what are you getting arrested for? Changes depending on your behavior. So he came for lunch at a bar. So it's middle of the afternoon, and he refused to wear a mask. And then the staff said, please put on a mask. And he says, I do not. So in Japanese, you can just say no. But a full sentence, I do not wear a mask. He's in reference to the previous statement, like, please wear a mask. He says, I do not. It means I do not do that. I don't really want to spend time explaining Japanese grammar. I should do it in Japanese then. This should become the Japanese lesson part of this episode. But I'm too tired to do that. That's effort. But he says, I do not. And then they're like, okay, just call the cops. We don't want to deal with this guy. Maybe, I guess not. He's not famous enough you would know who he was. So I now know his name is Junya. I also know he doesn't have a job, which makes me wonder, how is he taking these trips? He's getting on airplanes and traveling around. He's going to hotels and eating at restaurants in the hotel, and he's having lunch in the middle of the day in bars. If he's not unemployed, how does he have all this money to do this stuff? But anyways, it actually didn't say unemployed. They said no fixed occupation. So maybe he does different things because his occupation is not fixed. It's a different thing from being unemployed. He's become sort of a symbol of the anti-mask movement in Japan and being incredibly unreasonable. He's now got a blog, and on his blog he just talks about not wearing a mask and refusing to wear a mask, and this is me, and he's saying it's infringing on his human rights, which is what a lot of people say, like, you can't make me wear a mask. The interesting argument is that is basically true. Outside walking around, I don't think anyone will make you wear a mask. I don't think they can do that. The cops won't make you put on a mask if you're walking around without a mask on. A private business, on the other hand, absolutely has the right to refuse service based on whatever they want. So, like, you're noisy, you smell bad, you're not wearing a mask. They can refuse service for any reason they want. They could make up a reason. You have a haircut that doesn't match our standards. You can't come into this restaurant. It's a private business. They can accept and refuse who comes into the business. This seems to be a concept that people have trouble with. So, like, the freedoms that are guaranteed in the Constitution, those are sort of a national thing. It's very similar to America and other countries. But those freedoms are incredibly limited when it comes to the freedoms that the private businesses have, where they can refuse service based on any criteria they want. It's like a place with a dress code. If they say you have to wear a shirt to come in, then you have to wear a shirt to come in. A mask is just an extension of that. Anyways, the cops show up. There's an altercation, of course, because they're like, either put on a mask or get out. So then he punches a cop in the face. Bad idea. We'll just get that out there right now. That is a bad idea. Do not punch police in the face. Don't punch anyone in the face unless you're practicing boxing. But do not punch police in the face. It will get you in trouble. You are interfering, a very great law that we have in Japan, interfering with the duties of a public servant. So they don't call it assaulting an officer. You're just interfering with the duties of a public servant. So he's arrested for that. Now, suspects are required to wear masks when they go to essentially interrogation. So they take him to the prosecutors to have like a sit-down chat, like, okay, you're being arrested for charged with this and this and this. We're going to talk about it. You can either plead guilty or not, and then we'll go to court and we'll get you a lawyer, all that other stuff. But of course, he refused to wear a mask. So this delayed everything as they, I assume, forced him to wear a mask. He would not end up in the room with the prosecutors without a mask on. But the statement was suspects are required to wear masks to prevent infection, but they cannot be forced. So then the question is, did he end up wearing a mask when speaking to the prosecutors? I bet they could just put him in a different room and have the prosecutors and just do it with a microphone or something, or over Zoom. I don't know. All this stuff has to be recorded. That's something I learned recently. Basically, any interaction with a lawyer needs to be recorded with prosecutors or defense attorneys and stuff. There's no sort of lawyer-client privilege like there is that we've learned in America. And all the stuff I know about law in North America comes from TV shows, so I don't think that's the greatest source. But I know about like attorney-client privilege and doctor-client-patient privilege, that kind of stuff. That's not a thing in Japan. If I, as a foreigner, don't speak Japanese and I get an interpreter to speak to my lawyer, that all has to be recorded. They record everything. So there's nothing, once you've been arrested, there is no privacy anymore. So any sense of privacy, any sense of that privilege is gone. So that's something you need to know. If you come to Japan and you actually expect that, that's not going to happen. But this guy, he's taken it a step further. So he's argued with people. He pushed around the people in the bar, in the restaurant, in the hotel, in the last story. So I don't know if he hurt anybody particularly bad, but he got in trouble for that. But now he's moved up to punching cops. I assume sooner or later it's going to get bad enough that he's actually going to go to prison for probably an extended period. Masks is vaguely corona news, so I'm going to kind of stay on it. This was interesting only because of one sort of detail that came out. Rich people are chartering private jets more so than ever before because they don't want to take airplanes with other people, but they still want to travel around. The number of private jets chartered is up 20% compared to the pre-pandemic time. So the 20% for something like an expense like a private jet is massive because it's huge amounts of money. And so the only bit I was interested in was how much money does it cost to charter a private jet? Something I would probably never do. I certainly couldn't afford it. But even if I had the money, I don't know if that's the way I would go. A round trip to Beijing, so going from Japan to Beijing to back, 15 million yen. A trip from Japan to LA and back, 30 million yen. A trip from Tokyo to New York is 39 million yen. Now, the private jet you're getting has 13 seats. So you and 12 of your friends, or you could, keep it open so you 3 or 4 of your friends, so you have lots of seats and space. If you got 39 million yen lying around, you could fly from Tokyo to New York and back on your own private jet, which is kind of cool. But how does this compare to the average person? That's the bit I was kind of more interested in. The average salary, so we're talking about people who don't make enough money to people who make a lot of money. The average salary in Japan is between 4 to 5 million yen. So we're going to just round off, let's say 40 million yen, and if the base is 4 million yen as the average, you are talking 10 years salary just to go to New York and back on one of these charter jets. So I don't know if that is great for the rich people or depressing for us normal people who can barely even conceive of spending that much money on one thing. Like, I remember putting the down payment on my house, and that was the most money. I paid in cash because if I handed them a stack of cash, I actually got a discount. So I basically pooled all my money that my wife and I had saved to buy our house, and this was the down payment on the mortgage, and it was the most money I had ever held in my hands at one time. And then I just handed it over to someone else, and it was just gone. And it was still kind of inconceivable to just hold that much money at one time. Like a big stack of money that was as big as my head at that point. Japanese money, we are talking like yen. So, $1,000 is 100,000 yen. So it was thousands and thousands and thousands of yen. And I'm just staring at it, and I hand it over to this guy. He actually put it in one of those machines that I only ever see in movies where there's drug dealers and it counts the money for you. Yeah, I guess that was I'm down. That did not cheer me up, thinking about these people just spending like 10 years salary on probably a frivolous trip to New York. Yeah, we should tax the rich more. Okay, so now we're going to get into our crimes. Let's do the biggest crime this week by repetition in my news feeds. So it's not a particularly big crime, but I think because it's odd or weird or unusual, it showed up in about 10 to 15 feeds that I follow, all in the same couple of days. It's just the same story. It's a little bit short, to be honest, but there's a guy who was stealing ladies' shoes. What he was doing was sneaking in to wherever the ladies' shoes were, and I assume checking out the shoes. He was going away, buying a new pair of the same shoes, and then returning, taking the ladies' shoes, and then replacing them with a relatively identical pair of new shoes. He wanted to sniff the shoes. He wanted the lady smell. But he didn't actually want to get in trouble, I assume. So he was hoping that stealing a pair of shoes and replacing them, no one would notice he had stolen shoes. This is a very expensive thing to do. I bet you could go, I guess it wouldn't work out. He's a purist. So if you go on the internet and say, I want to buy lady shoes, you don't actually know if you're getting it from a lady. Like, let's say someone offered one of my friends, I'll buy your lady shoes, and then I could just wear them with my feet for a couple of days, and then we could send them off. And you wouldn't be getting real lady smell from the shoes. So that's maybe the concern. He wanted authentic, real lady shoes. An interesting question is, was the theft part of the thrill for him? That's always one of the questions I have in the back of my head. When they do these kind of like creepy crimes, is it the stealing is part of the thrill? Because again, this is a sexual thing. But is stealing part of that thrill, or is it just a means to an end? Like, I got to get the thing and get it home so then I can use it for my own pleasure and desires. A woman went to put on her shoes, noticed they were new, and they were stiff. So like, you get a new pair of shoes, you get callus, you get blisters sometimes because they're stiff. So she called the cops. She's like, I think someone stole and replaced my shoes. They had security footage, so he was actually found out pretty quickly. He was caught pretty quickly. He confessed immediately. So this is the opposite of our guy who wouldn't wear a mask. He wasn't punching any cops. And he said, his statement was, I wanted to smell the scent of women's shoes. But because he went out and bought shoes to replace the shoes he was stealing, this actually demonstrates premeditation. And just like murder, premeditation makes it a more serious crime. Because if you do it in the heat of the moment, it's bad. But if you sit down and make a plan and then execute the plan, that's worse. So it's the same in North America as it is in Japan. So premeditating the crime is actually a more serious crime. I, as someone who wouldn't care if you were sniffing my shoes, would actually be more happy about getting a new pair of shoes. I wouldn't, again, that's just me. It's hard to make a comment on this because how much money was he spending on shoes to get this thing? I honestly think spending that much money, he could have gotten legitimate shoes elsewhere. I don't know how to do it. Clearly, I've never actually tried or put any thought into how I would get a pair of real used shoes with authentic female smell. And now I'm going to think about it. That's going to be the rest of my afternoon, is thinking about the best way to do that and ensuring I get the real one. Because again, buying on the internet, there is the risk that you're not getting the authentic stench that you want to get. So this guy's going to prison. Sorry, dude. We had a sudden uptick in stalker news. Now, I didn't do all the stories. I just wanted to pick one that was sort of representative. And this one is a doctor. And he called the cops. So basically, he had fallen for a woman in a bar. And he went to the bar a bunch of times, and maybe they were telling him, you come to the bar too much. This is getting creepy. You got to stop. So he's standing outside the bar, and he calls the cops. He calls the cops, and he says, there is some trouble. And then the cops come, and they have a conversation with him, and then they have a conversation with the staff, and then they go to the guy, and they say, the police say to the man, don't contact the female employee in her 20s. So that was weirdly specific. So I'm assuming there's more than one female employee, but there's only one in her 20s. He's 53. Now, I'm getting close to 50, and my base assumption is that women in their 20s inherently do not find me attractive. I'm not a bad-looking guy. Still, everything's still in the right place. But when you're in your 20s, you don't look at men in their 50s and go, ooh, break me off a piece of that. He clearly doesn't think that. He is also a doctor, and we do have some assumptions about doctors. They think they're, infallible, godlike, and therefore they assume they're really attractive. And a lot of people do find doctors attractive because they have money. So maybe he's extended this assumption to people. Everyone around him loves him, and therefore this girl in her 20s must love him. So him wanting her means she should do what he wants. It's irrelevant. The police say don't contact her again. And after that, he sent 353 messages, all of which I would like to read, because they didn't give a span of time. Like, to send 353 messages is hard. I actually think on your phone would be way harder. Like, I could do that on my computer. I could type on a keyboard, but just with your thumbs, message after message after message, that would take forever. How long did it take to write 353 messages? What did those messages say? I bet they're not going to release it, but I would really like if it was one of those nice guy things that you see on Reddit. It's one of the subreddits I follow. I actually should stop. It's just guys losing their minds because they get rejected after being really nice to the ladies by saying one nice thing. Again, in a list of bad decisions, we have a couple of these that end off with bad decisions. So I'm going to finish up these all together. There was a guy with a knife, and the cop said, if you don't drop the knife, I'll shoot. The cop already had his gun out at this point. He was The man, actually someone called and said there was a man setting stuff on fire in a parking garage. And so the cop showed up. He's got a knife. And they say, put it down or I'll shoot you. The dude goes, if you can shoot, go ahead and shoot. So then they shot him. Now, this is not an American story. So they shot at his feet. That's what they actually said. They shot at his feet. And I think what they really meant was they shot low. Maybe they were trying to shoot him in the dick, but I don't know. They hit him in his abdomen. They only shot 2 rounds. So it was one cop, shot twice, was shooting sort of low. He didn't want to hit him in the chest or head. Shot him in the abdomen, and then he was arrested, went to jail. But I think people are starting to misunderstand what you can and can't say to cops. Certainly don't punch them in the face. We've learned that from the previous story. But if you have a weapon and you say, shoot me, there is a very good chance the cop is going to shoot you, even in Japan. There was a 50-year-old man on the Shinkansen. I should have put this at the beginning with the other mask. There's actually a couple of mask stories. Whatever. There was a guy arrested for mask snatching. He's riding his bicycle, and as he rides his bicycle past only women, he grabs the mask off their face and then rides away. So he could hurt their ears, but I mean, it's just more of a shock. Most of them will just like pull off. But that's one of those, again, very weird, very Japanese crimes to me. But that's actually not the story. There wasn't any details, so I wasn't going to get into it. But I do remember that just off the top of my head. There was a 50-year-old guy in the Shinkansen, and they said wear a mask. So maybe that's what this episode should be about. Is just, people who just are refusing to wear masks. They said, please put on a mask, and he refused. And then he went to the toilet, and he stayed in the toilet until the end of the trip. The end of the trip was Nagoya. And then the police, they were like, okay, you got to get out of the toilet because you got to get off the train. This is the last stop, and we got to clear out the train so we can move on and get the train off the tracks. It's blocking other trains that might come up. He yelled from inside the toilet, you can take me, a customer, hostage, and cause a riot if you want. Now, there's a couple of questions I had. And the first one was, what riot did he think it was going to, break out? If you are a lone man in the toilet, you're not famous, you're not important, nobody cares about you. I can tell you that because you're in a toilet alone on a Shinkansen. The police are going to take you away. Everyone's just going to watch you get arrested. No one is going to come to your defense. No one is going to fight the police on this. No one is going to take a stand on your behalf. There is not going to be a riot. My second question, this is a question that comes up a lot when it comes to these sort of plans. What was step 2? Step 1 was refuse to wear a mask and then go hide in the toilet until the end of the trip. How long did he intend to stay in the toilet? So let's say they actually acquiesced to his demands. They actually didn't force him out of the toilet, and this train was just going to sit there. What was going to happen next? He was just going to sit in the toilet? For how long? I mean, he's going to come out voluntary on his own. At least he can go to the toilet, but he doesn't have food. I don't know how long the water reserve is going to last on a Shinkansen. But he basically has no food, no water. He's stuck in a toilet. How long does he intend to actually stay there? So when he comes out, they're going to arrest him. So they had a choice of wait or just pull him out. It took 20 minutes. So I'm sure they talked to him for like 15 minutes. And then the cops were like, this isn't working out. We're just going to kick in the door and pull him out. But he clearly was confused as to what the world around him sees as him. How the world around him sees him. Because he seemed to think he was important, taking a stand, and everyone was going to rise up to support him, when in the reality is everyone's going to be like, really glad that weird guy got arrested. Hope I never see him again. And also, while he's sitting in the toilet, because he was in the toilet for, let's say 15, 20 minutes. I don't know how long the train ride's like, where he was coming from, but he's probably in the toilet because it was the whole trip. He had time to think about what he was going to do next, and he didn't come up with anything. If you're going to do something, if you're going to make a stand, first of all, have a complete plan. And part of a complete plan is an exit strategy. If part of your plan relies on the world around you rising up to support you, you might want to make sure that's something that actually would happen.
You can tweet questions or comments at Ninja News Japan or join the Facebook group. On Facebook, search for Ninja News Japan. Sexy out homies.
Again, the hawker, you are so basic. You don't look at men in their